It's Sunday, November 16, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a civil rights attorney and LGBTQ rights advocate, Alejandra Caraballo. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
We have lots to talk about. The Supreme Court this week rejected a call to overturn its landmark decision that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. Firstly, we've got a few things about the Supreme Court to look at, but firstly, did that surprise you as it did me?
No, it wasn't surprising at all. The petition by Kim Davis was always a very weak case because of the procedural posture and just everything that she was doing. She was acting as an official within her official capacity and denying people marriage licenses. And I think it just was not the kind of case that I think the Supreme Court would want to take up if they were going to try and overturn marriage equality. And so it was not surprising to me at all that the Supreme Court punted on this. That's not to mean that they won't rule on eventually overturning Obergefell. I think it's more of they probably have enough on their plate right now. And I think they have a longer term view on this. And I think what they're going to start to do is more incrementally erode the rights of LGBTQ couples. Like already this term, there's the conversion therapy case that is more than likely going to overturn conversion therapy bans at the state level. And then in addition, there's a case involving the State Department over spousal rights and immigration of same-sex couples. So we could see around the edges there to start like essentially making same-sex marriage a second-class right.
Right. So we shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security that they've changed their position, because Justice Clarence Thomas was alone in the 9 justices who called for erasing the same-sex marriage ruling, which that doesn't come as a surprise either.
No, especially not from Thomas. I believe between Thomas and Alito, those two are most certainly on board with overturning Obergefell. I think depending Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Bryant, they might be on board if the right case comes along. And then I think the wild cards are most certainly Justice Gorsuch and potentially Justice Roberts, just because of overturning precedent, especially one that was so recent. And then also the reliance interests. I mean, marriage is one of those things that would be very, very difficult to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube, because it's not just people getting married, it's inheritance rights, it's spousal privilege rights in terms of visitation at hospitals, inheritance rights among estates, like when people pass away. And it's just too, I think, complex for them to just say, well, we're going to invalidate these marriages. I mean, the actual practical realities would be immense for them to deal with.
There's a lot of focus, obviously, on the Supreme Court at the moment. Most people are looking at the tariffs issue, but there are these cases which, of course, require our attention too. There's also the passport ruling as well, which upholds the Trump-era policy on sex markers. Critics argue the real issue is the constitutionality of requiring government permission to travel at all. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so there's obviously the passport decision, which basically was a paragraph and a half, basically just saying that they said that the marking of biological sex is a historical fact, and that does not violate principles of equal protection. I was talking to a fellow law professor about this, and it was pretty clear, I think, that this was written by Alito. It was unsigned, so we don't really know who wrote it, but it just read as it came from Alito, because it just the level of derision and I think contempt that just came through in that just paragraph, where it was like they felt like trans people were so beneath them that they felt I would say burdened to even have to write that paragraph. And it was such an inconvenience to them. And so, and Justice Jackson did a phenomenal job in the dissent, highlighting just how abnormal it is on these kinds of shadow docket cases to go up to the Supreme Court, and the balance of equities here. Like the Supreme Court, the majority didn't even bother doing its typical balancing test here. and weighing the equities of harm and whatnot. But I think it really is just, the Supreme Court now, I think it's almost like 20 for 21 in terms of shadow docket cases, siding with the Trump administration on these emergency postures, because everything with the Trump administration is an emergency. And so it's just, it's part of a broader erosion of the norms of the Supreme Court and the way that they've become an openly partisan institution. And then beyond that, in terms of just like the substance of the passport issue, people think that this is a new thing. Trans people have been able to change gender markers on passports since 1992. And the addition of gender markers on passports at all is actually a modern phenomenon. They only added gender markers in 1976, and they only became compulsory to have on passports in 1978. So this is, there are plenty of people around that were alive that had passports that never had gender markers in the first place. And they're not even really relevant to what is a passport supposed to be for, which is identification, right? So like they're saying, it's a historical fact, like the sex assigned at birth, it's whatnot. Okay. But how does that help people identify me in the present? Right. Because if, a trans person who's transitioned, if they're having their sex marker on there and it doesn't match anything what they look like, that causes a problem for identification, which is the purpose of a passport. And so it doesn't even match that. And now with facial recognition technologies, gender markers, they shouldn't even be on passports in the first place. We should just revert back to what they had been before the 1970s and just say like, they just need your relevant information, your name, your birthday, like how old you are, those kinds of things. And then, now with facial recognition, like the rest of it is unnecessary anyways.
The point here, though, is the cruelty, it seems to me, and that what we've seen in the last 8-9 months of Trump's presidency, since it kind of really got underway, is any opportunity to demonize minority groups, certainly the LGBTQ plus community, but beyond that, just the kind of indiscriminate snatching of people off the streets. They've very much kind of set a bar, and it's it's shockingly low. And so nothing is really surprising me, but I recognize that they're not going to stop. I mean, you give an inch, they take a mile. And as you say, with the Supreme Court, who are probably going to come back around for gay marriage, that actually this is just Trump getting started. I mean, we're only almost a year into 4 years of this.
Yeah, I mean, even after Trump is long gone, the Supreme Court is going to stick around, and the courts that, with the judges that he's appointed are going to be issuing decisions for decades, long after he's gone. And so in that sense, like, even if Democrats retake, all three, they retake the House and the Senate and the presidency in 2028, they still have to contend with a Supreme Court that is extremely and openly partisan. And that will not even hide its ability to just strike down Democratic priorities. And so I think from the get-go, like, it needs to be from a non-negotiable that Democrats have Supreme Court reform and court reform as a top policy plank in 2028. They need to balance the courts, at a minimum, move up to 13 justices, which is equal to the number of circuit courts, so that each circuit court has at least one justice. And, rebalance some of the rules there, because right now, the way that the courts are balanced, it's just, they've exploited Democrats' institutionalism to basically hijack the courts. They've relied on the good faith of Democrats who have tried to maintain these institutions to basically play constitutional hardball and rig the courts to their side. And we can't have a functioning democracy where this like minoritarian form of government, essentially, that is in service of white supremacy, continues to function and overrule the popular will of the people. And so I think in that sense, there needs to be from the get-go an effort at Supreme Court reform to add more justices. And some people will say, well, then when Republicans get back in power, they'll add more Supreme Court justices, and then back and forth and back and forth. And I'm like, good.
Yeah. Because
other countries actually have extremely large, like, high courts. They oftentimes will have 20, 30, 40 judges. And that is actually better for us. Like, it's better for the legal profession, it's better for the courts. If you don't have the entire kind of jurisprudence of the nation hinging on the pulse of a single justice, right? We saw just how radically the courts have shifted after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away in 2020 and Amy Coney Bryant was added to the court. And I don't think that the court should function that way. It should not function solely on one person, and how it perverts incentives around arguing Supreme Court cases. Everything becomes tailored to the personal preferences of a single judge or justice rather than the strengths or merits of legal arguments. And so I think in that sense, like, the court would do well to be expanded and be a much bigger institution, so that this kind of back and forth doesn't happen. And so that Supreme Court justice confirmation don't become such acrimonious things. If you have a court that's filled with 20 or 30 justices, each one now doesn't become such a, partisan football anymore.
There's a good chance, though, that Trump could pack the court himself now over the next 3 years and load on even more far-right nationalist judges. I mean, he is off on one, to coin a phrase, right now. And I think, I mean, maybe you felt this, but the win of Zoran Mamdani for New York mayor, it kind of put a shock through Trump and the MAGA Republicans. They were almost so convinced, probably because they live in this kind of Mar-a-Lago flavored bubble, that they just thought that everybody's on board with them and that everything's doing great. And actually there was actual resistance at the ballot box, and not just in New York, but elsewhere too. And my worry is that that's going to cause them to spring back even harder.
Yeah, I think it was really a shock to the system. And I think it wasn't just, obviously Zoran Mamdani and the speech that he gave after was just absolutely electrifying. And he not only beat, conservatives in that sense, but he beat the Democratic establishment in New York.
Yeah.
And to do it not just by winning a majority of the vote, he surpassed 50%, but by doing it with an expanded electorate, right? And then the electorate in 2025 in New York City was the largest election in terms of turnout since 1969. So in the modern era, there's been nothing like that. He's the first mayoral candidate to win with over 1 million votes since the 1960s. And so that just shows, like, it's not just he's able to win and build these broad coalitions. He was able to do it by expanding the electorate and actually getting people out and excited to vote. This is exactly what Democrats have been asking for, right? Like, this was the thing that they've been spending tens of millions of dollars. How do we get people to come back out to the polls and be excited about Democrats again? And it's like, yes, let's focus on the bread and butter issues of affordability, but like, don't rely on these poll tested, just focus group tested policy planks that are just like milk toast, right? Like, be bold. And even if you don't accomplish everything you set out to, people still are hopeful and inspired when someone actually dares to try something, right? Like, even if Mamdani isn't able to get free buses, but maybe he's able to reduce the fare by half, like, that is going to be a measurable change that's going to better a lot of people's lives. If he's able to get a lot of zoning reform to be able to build more low-income housing, and if he's able to even open up some of these like lower cost grocery stores, I mean, that's measurable impact on people's lives. And I think those are the kinds of things that voters actually want to hear about. They don't want to hear about, like, we're going to, increase subsidies by 10% this year so that, it'll raise like all of this like wonky policy talk. That's not how things like people absorb policy in the real world. They want to hear big ideas. They want to hear that you actually believe in something, not just putting your finger in the wind and just being like, which way are the political winds blowing today? And I think that's what people want now. They want authenticity. They want someone who's genuine. And Mamdani in particular, like, go into the halal carts. I lived in New York for 8 years. Everyone loves going and eating at the halal carts. It's like some of the best food you could get for, like, when I first moved to New York in 2013, it was like $5, right, for a gyro. Like, it was amazing. And he was like, halal food costs too much. And like, people think like, what? And it's like, yeah, that's actually a thing. Like, working people rely on that to like have a cheap, easy meal. And and he was able to tie it to a wonky policy of permitting reform for food cart vendors. And that's the kind of thing that we need.
Yeah, it definitely is extremely refreshing. And even just the rebranding of cost of living to affordability has been quite clever too, because affordability is not a word that we have really used or Democrats have really used. It's all very much, inflation and prices. But affordability, there's something about it where it's much more tactile and it makes a lot more sense. And I see the Republicans are kind of trying to jump on it now too, because they saw the Democrats have success with it. But theirs is going to be all talk and no action. In fact, their policies make everything way more expensive. Not that they would ever admit that. So we're in a kind of transition period now, I guess, especially with the government shutdown, with 8 dissenting Democrats who basically have really dropped the ball. It certainly feels like that over these healthcare subsidies. How did you feel when you heard that there were kind of 8 that crossed the line and kind of really dropped the ball on this holdout?
Yeah, that was rage inducing, because I've just been seeing so many stories of federal workers having to sacrifice so much, people on SNAP or food stamp benefits, like having to sacrifice, like food banks just being overwhelmed. And a lot of them were willing to sacrifice if it meant, hey, we can actually, like, I think, I necessarily don't think it was the best issue, but I think it was one that was okay. It was the ACA subsidies. People are getting their renewal notices and their benefit, their premiums are jumping from $500 to like $1,800 a month. Like, this is massive increase for people's healthcare costs. And I think people were willing to sacrifice and say, look, let's make sure that people can get healthcare. Like that, I think people are willing to, and then ultimately the Dems caved for an IOU vote in December. That's most certainly like not going to pass. It just means like, it felt like this last month and a half was an exercise in futility. And, and I think it's frustrating because it also highlights the disingenuousness of the Democratic leaders, particularly Chuck Schumer, who was like, oh, I'm against this deal. I voted against it. He's the minority leader, right? He is the leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. Those senators are not going to break away if they don't have his implicit blessing. And not only that, the types of senators who did break away, they were either all retiring or had re-elections in 2030. So that means people who are going to be insulated from the anger of the electoral base in the Democratic primaries. And so, they do this all the time. They pick members to be the sacrificial votes, so that they can get something done and then pretend otherwise, that, oh, well, it was just these members that broke away. And it was like, no, you have incredible, powerful tools. You can use the DSCC to basically threaten members and say, we're going to support a primary challenge, or we're not going to endorse you again. Like Chuck Schumer has incredible power to leverage his members. So it's basically not just letting those members cave. It is then being disingenuous and lying to us and saying that, oh, I had no control. I'm against this. No, you engineered this deal, and you're lying to everyone, saying that you had nothing to do with it.
As we're speaking now, there are calls for him to resign and for new leadership in the Democrats. Would you support that?
Yeah, absolutely. He's been absolutely ineffective. And I think, looking back on Trump 1, and it just is remarkable, I think, to me, the difference between having Nancy Pelosi as speaker or a leader of the Democrats in the House versus Chuck Schumer now kind of taking lead role, because between him and Hakeem Jeffries, there's clearly no concerted leadership. Whereas Nancy Pelosi could just scalp the White House essentially and get whatever she needed. Some of the biggest reforms, like the amount of major reforms that she was able to push through in 2020 as part of the COVID bills, incredible. Like I disagree with Nancy Pelosi on a lot, and she's retiring now finally to pave way for younger leadership. But during her time, like, she showed the ability to actually extract meaningful concessions and maneuver around the legislative branch. And I think that's fundamentally missing from the legislative leaders in both Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer.
Before we move on, I just want to finish talking about the trans issue regarding sports. This was a story out of Virginia that, again, is something that Republicans will not drop. And they refer to women playing in men's sports. Their use of language is completely inappropriate and also makes no sense either. But for them, it works, and slogans seem to be getting them everywhere. Just react to that story before we move on, because I think it's very important. I
think what's interesting, what happened in Virginia, and to a lesser extent, but similarly in New Jersey in particular, was just the absolute defeat of anti-trans policies and politics as a motivating force in elections, right? Winsome Earle-Sears spent according to Notice, used 57% of their campaign funds for all the spending on ads on anti-trans ads. And some of these were pretty horrendous. I think American Principles Project put out some basically calling trans people mass shooters and violent extremists, and just really heinous stuff. And, from what I heard in Northern Virginia, these ads were playing literally every other ad on TV on like Sunday when people were watching football. It was just nonstop. And Winsome Earle-Sears lost by 15 points. I mean, just an absolute walloping. And basically focused it on this to the exclusion of all these other things. And what I've always told people is that, for better or for worse, most people just don't care about trans issues. They just don't care. I mean, that's not great for us when we have serious material issues around housing and healthcare and all of these other things. But on the flip side, like, generally, they just don't care about it. And I think they took the wrong lesson away from 2024, where they thought that some of those ads worked. And I think it was just kind of the uniqueness of Trump on the ballot in some sense. And I think the way that they connected it, particularly to like Trump is for you kind of messaging. But I think also it was just the weakness of the 2024 ballot. Like, Biden should never have run for re-election from the get-go. And, the amount of time that Kamala Harris had to run. And I think they overlearned that lesson. And I think the Democratic establishment trying to reinforce that by trying to shift people away from messaging on trans issues. And I think Mamdani, to go back to what we were speaking about earlier, was able to pivot on these issues of affordability without abandoning trans people. And his core planks on his policy platforms was like expanding funding for gender affirming care by $60 million to ensure that it's a safe haven for trans people. But they weren't able to pigeonhole him on that because he was so laser focused on affordability and these broader issues that actually appeal to most people that they couldn't even try to like categorize him on like as being too focused on identity. And like, that's the lesson to be learned here, is that if you are focused on the right issues and you inoculate yourself against these kinds of attacks about identity, like it just doesn't work. And we saw that in Virginia. We saw that in New Jersey, where Mikey Sherrill won by, I think, like almost 13 points. Like, that's just incredible. And it just really shows that this kind of politics doesn't work. And I think there's a lot of soul searching that needs to be done on the Democratic Party side, especially among Democratic Party apparatus, about why they were so eager to basically abandon trans people when a lot of the failures were on the people leading the party, not trans people. We're the kind of, we've been kind of on the downside and bearing the brunt of all of this. We're just we've been a political football, and Democrats, I think abandoning a vulnerable community just shows that they don't fundamentally believe in anything.
But does it also suggest that they don't really know how to communicate these messages? And that, it seems, part of the problem. As you say, when you say people don't care about trans issues, I would say that it doesn't really feature in their lives, not that they know of. and so therefore it doesn't seem personal to them. How important is it to kind of highlight trans issues specifically, or to try and roll, as Mamdani did, kind of roll it into that mixed community in New York?
Yeah, I think it's about one of the most important things as candidates should focus on is essentially establishing yourself as someone who actually believes in something, right? And actually believes in their platform, and that they're not some poll tested, focus group tested candidate that only says like what they think is popular in the moment. And I think voters really pick up on that. And I think if you're able to really focus on issues of affordability and say, look, the electricity costs are astronomical in Virginia and New Jersey, and we're going to work to fix that. We're going to work to fix food prices by whatever they can, lowering potentially giving some rebates or whatever policy initiatives they can around that. Housing affordability by fixing some of the zoning issues, like all of those things, like real like kitchen table stuff, not to sound like the cliche, but those kinds of things, and then actually have conviction about it, right? And like try to like even bring some of the more pie in the sky stuff, because I think voters want big ideas. They want like people to believe, or they want to believe in candidates that actually feel like they're fighting for them. And once that is established, I think that's more important than anything you can say about trans rights or trans issues, because then they'll just say, well, these are ancillary issues. We trust you on that. And I think like that's important. And I think particularly, in Virginia, Spanberger was able to deflect these attacks because they were just heinous. They were accusing her of supporting sexual predators because they're equating trans people as sexual predators. And Spanberger, having been, I think she was a prosecutor, essentially was like, look, like I worked on these cases. I've prosecuted these kinds of cases, and and she really inoculated against those things, because she's like, my entire career has been focused on these issues, and it's hard to paint someone as like supporting these straw man arguments when she came out really early and kind of buttressed against those arguments that they were making.
Well, people, voters, American citizens are quite progressive leaning nationally, generally. We're just led to believe that there is this kind of crazy divide because of the misrepresentation of the Republican Party. They do not represent people en masse as the numbers say. And so I'm very much of the opinion that Democrats need to lean in to these issues, as opposed to, because there was talk, especially after Kamala Harris's loss, that Democrats need to be a little more careful, and they need to not get behind these issues that are putting off traditional kind of conservative voters or independents or undecided voters. But actually, after Mamdani and Spanberger as well, as you describe, there is a suggestion that leaning in and representing everybody and not being shy about it is actually the solution to how Democrats can brand themselves going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and the weirdly, the academic literature on this has always shown that abandoning communities does not gain you votes, right? It's particularly with regards to immigration. I'm analogizing this to immigration. They've shown where parties run to the right to try and preempt, more far right extremist policies on immigration, it neither gets them votes, it actually erodes their own political base, and then actually legitimizes extremist positions on immigration. And so actually standing for something is actually much more important. And it seems counterintuitive, but people are generally in favor of genuine, if a politician actually genuinely believes in something, right? In the dignity of immigrants and the dignity of LGBTQ people, and say, look, I'm willing to fight for everyone. And, and Republicans try to turn that on its head, but theirs is a divide and conquer strategy, right? It's the middle of the shutdown. We're still technically in the shutdown, even though the Senate's moving to end it. The Trump administration is advancing rules to ban gender affirming care for Medicaid recipients, right? So SNAP, they're not funding SNAP. They're starving 40 million people. They're not paying the military. But what are they working on right now? They're working on stripping trans people of healthcare. And the weird rhetorical thing, or like the way that this politics works, is so bizarre to me, because they claim Democrats are obsessed with this issue. But I guarantee you, if a Democrat in the middle of a shutdown was advancing rules to expand healthcare to trans people, they would be crucified by Republicans, right? And the inverse of that now is that Republicans are moving, or the Trump administration is moving to strip trans people of healthcare in the middle of a shutdown. While they're not paying the military, they're not feeding the country through SNAP. And it's just, it's crazy to me, like the dichotomy in how the perception is that Democrats are obsessed with these issues when it's really the Republicans.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and staying on the subject of Trump and his extremism. He's trying to get the Supreme Court to allow him to wriggle out of paying E. Jean Carroll for the liabilities there too. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. My days are always packed. Meetings, writing, recording, editing. And when I finally hit the mattress at the end of the day, I need to deliver. My Legend mattress from Lisa has completely changed how I recharge at night. It gives me the kind of deep, restorative sleep that I didn't realize I was missing. I've learned that how you sleep is just as important as how long you sleep, and Lisa really delivers the how. The Legend mattress adjusts to my body and sleep position in a way that feels intentional and balanced. The support helps me fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. Lisa has a lineup of beautifully crafted mattresses tailored to how you sleep. Each mattress is designed with specific sleep positions and feel preferences in mind. Lisa has been tested and awarded Best Hybrid Mattress by New York Times Wirecutter and is exclusively featured by West Elm as their go-to mattress partner. And Lisa isn't just about sleep, it's also about impact. They donate thousands of mattresses each year to those in need, while also partnering with organizations like Clean Hub to help remove harmful plastic waste from our oceans. Go to lisa.com for 25% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code WEEKEND, exclusive to you. That's LEESA.com, promo code WEEKEND for 25% off mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Support our show and tell them that we sent you after checkout. Lisa.com, promo code WEEKEND. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the weekend show with Alejandra Caraballo. I'm Anthony Davis. Donald Trump has asked the Supreme Court to overturn the $5 million judgment that he sexually abused and defamed the writer E. Jean Carroll, calling her allegations facially implausible and politically motivated. This is it's a shame that this is still ongoing, considering, not just how long ago this event was, but the fact that, time and time again this case gets kicked back and they just reconfirm the fact that Trump did what he did, and the fact that his use of language as well, defaming her, means that he's due to pay even more. It's almost like he can't let this lie and learn his lesson. It is a real problem when the so-called leader of the formerly free world and the commander-in-chief has been designated a sexual abuser in this way. I mean, what is that? I mean, how does that affect the country as a whole, especially with young people kind of growing up and with this guy as a role model?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it in the gender split among Gen Z. I mean, if you saw, I think was it under 30 for Mamdani, I think it's like 85%. I mean, you're talking like Stalin levels like support for Mamdani, or Assad level support, or Putin or whatnot, among like young women, because I think they're just so absolutely repulsed by just how misogynistic the Republican Party has become and how openly so they've become. And now it's become among right-wing influencers now to talk about repealing the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, and just, saying that women should be in the workplace, like all these openly like misogynistic things that we thought were like remnants of the 1960s Mad Men era. And it's now become kind of mainstream politics again in the Republican Party. And it's not a surprise that essentially these gender splits, I mean, the most recent of some of them are like 50 points between young men and young women within the Gen Z cohort. And that's just, I mean, it's just astronomical. And it is worrying as well for like what that means for just the stability of the country when there's that massive of a gender split. People have been concerned about like what that's going to do for marriage and family formation and all of these other things. But I think it's just reflective that Donald Trump himself is just off-putting to young people, especially young women, and is just a terrible role model. And I think it's unleashed a real ugliness in politics that, I think a lot of people really wish could be put back. And I think it's not as easy. And I really, over the last few weeks, have you seen the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes debacle and Heritage Foundation and all those things? You can't put the genie back in that bottle, right? Like once you've let out this kind of ugly politics, the kinds of monsters that you're not okay with suddenly taking over your party, like I don't know what people thought. Like if you thought, if we could just only focus this on trans people or LGBTQ people or immigrants, that suddenly it wouldn't also come for more right-wing Jewish figures or more establishment conservatives. And it's like that you can't contain bigotry. You can't contain this kind of stuff. It will eventually escape containment and swallow you whole as well. It's the term is riding the tiger. And I think that's exactly what the Republican Party has done with Trump. And he's unleashed an ugliness in our politics that I just really wish we could get rid of.
Well, he's also so unloved. My theory is that's why he demolished the East Wing, because, it represents the First Lady and she doesn't want anything to do with him. And so he's like, screw you, I'm just going to bulldoze this in the middle of the night. There's that. But there's also not believing survivors, which is, I think, the biggest issue here, where, this constant pushback against E. Jean Carroll and saying things like, she's not my type, as an excuse for the reason why this could never have happened. No one's buying it. And really the lesson from senior leadership needs to be that always believe survivors, especially women in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to that point about the East Wing in particular being demolished, there was also the Rose Garden, like Jackie Kennedy's Rose Garden was paved over.
Right.
The other part of the garden on the other side by the East Wing was also like demolished as part of the East Wing. And I think it just really speaks to a contempt for women. It speaks to a contempt for their achievements, right? Which the East Wing was built with consultation of Eleanor Roosevelt, right? She was the first one to establish the office there. And, it's no surprise that the big things that they're tearing down at the White House are all the things that were built by women and with their input and are named after them. And in terms of, this broader cultural backlash against the Me Too movement, I think there's this idea that somehow it went too far in the 2010s, like in that, men were somehow canceled unfairly. And like, look at the kind of hallmark case of it. Like you had people that otherwise you'd think would never be welcomed back in public life are now selling out Madison Square Garden, like Louis C.K., who was sexually harassing women left and right, and all of these other people that just you thought were like the repercussions never really lasted. I think the only person who's ever really was Harvey Weinstein, and even one of his convictions were overturned. Bill Cosby is back out. And a lot of these people are thriving more than ever. And so to say that Me Too and the broader backlash against, chauvinism, male chauvinism in the workplace and misogyny, that it went too far, I think it's asinine to even believe that, because just one little shift in power dynamics, right? Just to at least get a kind of to get to a cultural place where women even feel okay speaking up was somehow seen as this like massive infringement on the workplace and on men in particular. And it's so demoralizing in the sense that like even just this little iota of accountability suddenly is met with this ferocious backlash.
We should also probably mention the giant Republican cover-up of a child sex trafficking ring with the Epstein files, and the fact that it sounds like Donald Trump is about to give Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon or let her out. She's already been taken from maximum security, and we've seen through these kind of leaked emails that she's having a great time, and she has an emotional support animal with her, and she's able to use the internet. I mean, she is one of the most dangerous criminals in America based on that history. And yet Trump pretended the other week, oh, well, I'd never heard of her. Who is she? Sorry, I can't quite hear you, and all that stuff. And then behind the scenes, we hear that a pardon is very much on the table.
Yeah. And, she's been moved to Club Fed in violation of DOJ policy where people who are convicted of sexual based offenses can't be moved out of the higher security facilities. And, and it is so blatant what they did with the testimony and like her saying, no, Trump, I never saw him do anything untoward. And it was like, are you kidding me? Your definition of untoward was sexually trafficking women, like young women. So like, I don't
children,
trust
effectively.
Yeah. Children.
Yeah.
I don't trust anything you have to say. It's just, it's incredible. And I think how scared they are about this is like, you can see it in the House where they've refused to swear in incoming Rep Grijalva, like now for like almost 2 months. She won an election, I think in like September, and it's now November and she hasn't been sworn in. And it's just, it's incredible. Like they've only gavelled into session like 10 days since basically July. And it's because there's a discharge petition pending to release the Epstein files that they have in Congress. And they're worried that as soon as she gets there, it's going to tip the vote and they're going to be forced to release this. And it's like, well, what is exactly in those files?
Yeah.
I dislike the conspiracy thinking around this and all of that, but like, you start to wonder what are they working so hard to protect
right.
here?
Well, we're hearing it's actually far worse than anybody thought. And so, we have a government that is lying about the cost of living, claiming that gas is $2, claiming that it's only beef that's a problem at the moment, when in reality people are silently suffering, cannot afford their rent or their energy bills. And then at the same time, the government is running this kind of massive cover-up campaign over a massive child sex trafficking ring. It really is the worst of times in terms of leadership. We mentioned role models earlier, demolishing the White House. I mean, the White House demolition is a metaphor for this authoritarian regime right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. They're building a gilded ballroom, and during a government shutdown, while they're withholding payment of SNAP benefits for 40 million people. They're intentionally starving 40 million people, and they're building a gilded ballroom. And then also Trump is like tweeting about the remodeled Lincoln bathroom where he put in gilded fixtures and marble and all of this other stuff. And it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now?
But he does think that people love that. Like he's so blind to what's really happening. I mean, I don't think he even realizes what SNAP benefits are or how necessary they are or what it means to be so poor that you cannot feed yourself or you have to choose between heating your home and eating a meal that day. He doesn't have any empathy for that. And I suppose that's why a lot of these Democratic candidates that we saw in this special election had success, because it was almost the antidote to his kind of Great Gatsby, Gilded Age idea of what America looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Great Gatsby party that they had. I mean, it's just the split screen of that, of seeing food banks with lines, just hundreds of people long, like running out of food while they're having these extravagant parties and seafood towers and all of this stuff. It just, it really is like that is exactly what the Gilded Age was in the Roaring 20s, just this massive wealth disparity and just indifference to the suffering of everyday people. It's just, it's incredible to me. And I really think that these people do not understand the forces that they're messing with, essentially, because, I think Trump in particular was elected because he was in some ways able to hone in on the affordability thing. He was like pushing that, even though anyone with 2 working brain cells could have figured like he's probably the worst individual you could have elected to fix affordability issues. I think a lot of it was just kind of partial memories of his first term where the guardrails were on and people were keeping him from doing these destructive things. And now those guardrails are gone. But, I think the kinds of wealth inequality that are accelerating right now, and especially if we have an AI bubble popping in the near term with the stock market essentially crashing and we go
and a crypto bubble too. Yeah.
Yeah. And we slide into a major recession again, after 2008, like the kinds of anger that will surface. I don't know. And people think that the Democrats will benefit. I think a lot of elected Democrats in office right now will not be in office by 2027 or 2029 because of the backlash that's going to be directed at both parties. And, I think right now is an extremely populist moment, and Trump was able to harness it last year, but he hasn't done any of the things that he's tried to satiate the populism by focusing on immigrants and scapegoating LGBTQ people and immigrants, but he's not fundamentally fixing people's material problems. No. And that's lingering and persisting. And that anger is building. And I worry about the stability of our country long term as this anger builds and builds. And I don't necessarily think that Democrats are always going to be the beneficiary of this because it's directed at both parties right now. And I mean, you see it, what's worrying to me is the kinds of things that you see about Luigi Mangione, right? Like you see the cheering for him over alleged assassination of a healthcare CEO, like whatever you feel about healthcare CEOs and whatnot, I think it's an ominous sign when you see people cheering on political violence, regardless of who it's aimed at, because those are forces that no one can control. And that's a danger to everyone. And so I think like that's what worries me. And these kinds of like moves that Trump are doing is he's building a powder keg, and this country is on the precipice.
But it's on purpose. I mean, none of this is by accident. And the theories out there by historians even are that part of the authoritarian's role is to devalue the economy and to have, we're looking at potentially the value of the dollar falling, it not being the gold standard on the world stage anymore, and by crashing and burning it so that then they can then take responsibility for rebuilding it and earn in that moment. But my other concern is that he is also intentionally trying to kill the groups that he doesn't care for, from the minority groups, people of color, and the poor. And we've heard him say this out loud. I mean, with reference to the Venezuelan fishermen saying, well, we're just going to kill them. Dead, he said. One of the weirdest, most chilling things that I've seen come out of his mouth. And yet it was said with such pleasure. It was weird. And this to me is a kind of systemic decision that is baked into this regime where they want the poor to die. Taking away SNAP benefits is intentional. And the cost of healthcare going up to the point that it's unaffordable means that more poor people will die. That is intentional. And to say this stuff out loud gives me no pleasure, but it's the reality as I see it.
No, it certainly is. And I think there is a gleeful pleasure in the cruelty that they have and like that they mete out to the population. I think the fundamental miscalculation here where, authoritarians generally gain more power through kind of destroying institutions and kind of putting countries through crisis to gain more power, is that a lot of the authoritarians that are successful at that are broadly popular. You look at countries like Russia, Hungary, Turkey, like at various times they've, Putin, Erdogan, Orban, and others have experienced popularities in the 70s, 80%, right? Like massive popularity. And they have such a cult of personality that they're able to persevere through negative material impacts on people's lives by keeping them in the mentality that, you must sacrifice for something bigger,
that's a toxic relationship though, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very toxic relationship. It mimics the abusers to a T.
100%.
The problem with Trump is he's never been popular. His approval ratings have always been in the low 40s, both as a ceiling and effectively a floor almost. And, and he's only been able to gain power because of the minoritarian mechanisms within the US system between, first losing the popular vote in 2016, the minoritarian basis of the Senate, and even the gerrymandering of the House. There's a lot of mechanisms in play that allowed Trump to gain power and also consolidate power, but he's been able to do it without the popularity. But if that popularity is not there, it can lead to a lot of instability. And oddly enough, I think a lot of folks find this counterintuitive. Democracies are stable. Authoritarian countries, once the power is consolidated, are stable. They're relatively stable. It is the transition point, what's called anocracy, between democracy and authoritarian regimes, that is the most unstable form. It either goes one way or the other. It's basically almost like if you have a hill in terms of like, if you're thinking of it that way, like the in-between is the hill, and it either wants to roll one way or the other, and it's unstable standing there in between. And right now, the United States is kind of in that phase of anocracy where there's this authoritarian attempt at consolidation. And I think Trump is failing. I mean, I think he was successful early at consolidating a lot of power over the media, over law firms, academia, But now there's like, he's starting to run into headwinds, and pushback, and he's turning 80, right? He's term limited. Obviously he's made a lot of jokes that he's going to run for a third term, but long term, like, I think the failure here is that they hitch their wagon to a budding authoritarian who is going to turn 80 while in office, and is term limited and doesn't have the decade-long runway that these other authoritarians had to consolidate power. And he's trying to do it much more quickly. And those kinds of moves do not work well when they're done quickly. They have to be slow, methodical to consolidate power. And I think he's right now where we're at, I think he's failing to do the kinds of consolidation that he would need to prevent the kind of backlash that is building.
But he really is just a figurehead, though, isn't he? I mean, the only thing I've ever seen him get excited about is the ballroom. He's not able to speak in detail about any other policy. And so, it's the Russell votes and the Stephen Millers are the operatives. And you've probably noticed that the vice president has tried to step up his presidential game recently as well. So they obviously recognize that. And Trump did fall asleep for 20 minutes during an Oval Office event the other day. And when the man behind him fainted, Trump was not able to offer any kind of empathy or sympathy. He basically just froze. And so we're seeing somebody who is obviously compromised mentally, emotionally, but now physically too. And so I agree that he does have a shelf life, but there have been plenty of authoritarian leaders, General Pinochet, for example, in Chile, who will continue to run right into old age, and some have run from their hospital beds. And Trump, unfortunately, is one of those people that can eat a diet of McDonald's and seem to just live forever. And I do worry about that. So all of these distractions of, he's going to be dead in 6 months, which some people are predicting, I just don't buy it. I think he's in it for the long term.
Yeah, I'm a little bit always pessimistic about this. It seems like the worst people always live forever. I just, Kissinger lived past 100. So I have no faith. I fully expect Trump to live to like 90 plus and just be around forever. Like, there's something about like just evil prolonging people sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think in reality, though, I think what you're seeing with Vance trying to make his moves here is, I think in what was shown by the elections just now, the Republican Party has a Trump not on the ballot problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a successor problem, which always happens with authoritarian regimes, right? They always end when they cannot find a successor. You mentioned Pinochet. I mean, Pinochet, once he was on his way out, Chile transitioned to democracy. Same thing with Franco in Spain, right? They just couldn't last longer than the strong man that they were built around. And so I don't think Vance is the kind of successor. I think they're trying to consolidate power so that maybe they don't need the kinds of broad-based popular support, and they can suppress dissent. But I don't think that's going to be Vance. He's
too unlikable for a start, isn't he? There's nothing likable about him at all.
He doesn't have Trump has this like special riz. I don't know what it is.
It's the showbiz, yeah.
Yeah, and he's able to get people's attention. And Vance, as much as he tries to make himself as like this counter elite, like he's a product of Yale Law. And so he's just not. He just can't harness that kind of cult of personality that Trump can. And he's a
shapeshifter as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
Vance has changed his identity, his sexuality, his name, and his religion. It's all changed in recent years. And so as a shapeshifter, it's very hard for people to actually kind of grab onto any of that.
Exactly. And we saw with DeSantis in Florida, with him running for president, somebody attempting to mimic that cult of personality, the mannerisms and the strongman style, and just
so
face plant.
Yeah.
Just face plant. And, I think, and the other thing that Vance is really going to be running up against, his wife is Indian. And the far right that's ascendant now, the Nick Fuentes wing of the Republican Party, hate people of Indian descent. And he's trying to actively court that through being openly racist. I mean, he just went and repeated the Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs lie and smear again. And if he thinks that somehow he can harness that kind of politics, that kind of blood and soil, white nationalist politics, and that it won't come for him because he can stand above it, I think there's a lot of people making light of it with him embracing Erica Kirk. And a lot of people were pointing at, like, I think I was like, I think he's going to end up being divorced before he runs in 2028, because in the type of politics that he wants to harness, like having his current wife as a political liability for him. Yeah. And I think that's frankly disgusting, because she's a tremendously accomplished woman. She graduated Yale Law, with clerked to the Supreme Court. Like, she, and
she's the mother of his children.
Yes.
And right. He says out loud, I'm going to try and get her to change her religion. I mean, he was saying that last week.
Yeah. And it seemed like he was almost throwing her under the bus. Like, not even respecting her religious beliefs. Like, you knew who she was, like what her religious beliefs were before you married. And now suddenly, because you converted, and he was trying to put it in that way. And, and I think that he's already thrown away everything he believed in. His friends, like his trans friend from law school, right? And the kinds of politics, like, would he be so craven to throw his own wife under the bus and basically in pursuit of political power? And, I don't think he has any scruples. I think,
that's what you're looking for. I mean, unfortunately, however, I've often said this, is that whatever that feeling is that you get about how terrible these people are and their plans, they will all come true. And I think that we have as humans, we have great instinct for right and wrong and good and bad. And, bad eggs, these people are bad eggs. And maybe it's just the case that some people truly are terrible. And they just happen to have infiltrated the US government. My concern, though, is, as you say, because there will be huge opposition to all of this stuff, that the only way that Trump can win is to cheat. And he just pardoned all of the January 6 co-conspirators and the fake electors and Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Mark Meadows. Pardon them, basically admitting his own crimes. But going forward, it does seem to me that now with the Mamdani movement and this sense that Democrats really are a force to be reckoned with, that the doubling down on cheating beyond gerrymandering, I mean, a whole new level. I mean, the Republicans just bought Dominion voting systems, which are responsible for half of the votes counted in the US. This is going to get dirty, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean... So this is one of the things that I've been trying to tell people to also pay attention to, right? Like, Trump is in some ways a giant distraction from what's happening. I mean, it's happening very openly, but the oligarch class that is taking over all of society, the Ellisons, who have purchased CBS Paramount, are in the middle of a takeover bid for Time Warner, Discovery. And, that includes CNN. And Larry Ellison himself is part of the bid now to take over the US operations of TikTok. So within a year, Larry Ellison will have control of CBS, CNN, all of the media empire around them, and the distribution of media through TikTok, right? And so, one man, the second richest man in the world, is going to have all of that control. Elon Musk obviously bought Twitter. Zuckerberg has control of all the rest of social media through Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and Threads.
Yes.
And you're seeing Bezos exert even more and more control over the Washington Post.
Right. And Apple has capitulated as well. They gave Trump a gold bar. Yeah.
And they're taking down apps from the App Store that the Trump administration is demanding be taken down. And and so the oligarchs are consolidating control over the media. They're consolidating control over all of the other institutions of daily life. And they're going to be around long after Trump is gone. And I think those are the things that are much harder because you can't vote Larry Ellison out, right? You can't essentially do that. And I think if Democrats want to be serious, they need to invest in leaders like Lena Khan, and really need to look at modern antitrust law, like to divest, bring back strict ownership controls over media businesses to break up these giant media conglomerates and ensure that, you can't have, we saw with Jimmy Kimmel, right? Like him being pushed off the air is because Sinclair and I'm forgetting the name of the other media group that's like seeking a merger now that owns a significant portion of broadcast stations across the country. They were demanding them being taken down, and now they're going to own multiple stations in a single market, right? So you can turn on different local news, and they're going to be shoveling the same talking points at you and give you the illusion of choice in terms of your media. And I think really, if Democrats want to be serious, they have to be talking seriously about breaking up these media conglomerates and breaking up, these giant tech companies, and not just, saying we're going to look into it or enforce existing antitrust authorities. They need to pass new and modernize antitrust law for the 21st century, because the Supreme Court's gutted the jurisprudence around antitrust and made it nearly impossible to actually enforce in practice. I mean, we saw this with the Google decision. It took monumental effort to get Google in on antitrust over the Chrome browser.
Yeah.
And what was like all they were, it was very milquetoast reforms that the judge ordered. And I think that's because they were concerned about being overturned on appeal. And it just speaks to the kind of temerity that Dems have. And fundamentally the conflict of interest that they have, because they're dependent on the donations from these same people running all of these media conglomerates.
It means that America will look, and is starting already to look, more like Russia as a structure and as a construct. But Trump wants that. I mean, that's the advice he's been getting when he invites Putin into the beast for a little chit chat. Is that this is. I mean, that was probably more about mail-in voting, which is the next thing that's about to happen too. So getting rid of the vote, reducing opportunities to vote. Things like mail-in voting, Trump now is going to double down on. Supreme Court will probably have his back. And before you know it, we're going to be living in the kind of autocracy that has enabled Putin to remain in power for nearly a quarter of a century.
Yeah. But, I think the fundamental mistake, again, like I mentioned, is relying and hitching their wagon to an aging 80-year-old budding autocrat. He does not have the time to consolidate the institutions in power. And even if he does, they have a successor problem. And I think they believe that if they sufficiently gain control over these institutions, they can just install their puppet figure in Vance, who's been essentially groomed by Peter Thiel and his Silicon Valley buddies to be like their figurehead president.
That's why they're rushing everything, though, isn't it? Because the ticking clock is that their supreme leader has an expiry date.
Yeah, and those institutions of control, right? Like, Supreme Court coming in and gutting the Voting Rights Act, which will likely essentially eliminate Democratic representatives across the Deep South and decimate the Congressional Black Caucus. Those kinds of reforms, like mail voting, all of those things, like, those only work up to a certain point, right? Like competitive authoritarianism only works so far as like the majority of the population is in your camp. If it's not, like, they can backfire spectacularly. And I really think that they do not understand the kinds of, again, the forces that they're playing with. And I think, we seem to be reliving the 1920s at the same time, where there's massive wealth disparity, just runaway rampant greed by the oligarchs and the titans of industry. And what happened, right? We saw a massive crash in 1929, and the resulting backlash was FDR coming in and instituting the New Deal. And I think, a similar crash under Trump and a major economic recession, I could see like not just the Republican establishment, but the Democratic establishment swept away with a new style of politics that I think we're seeing in AOC and Mamdani, and a new type of politics that's going to be solely focused on eliminating the power of the extremely wealthy in this country. And, I think in a lot of ways, these extremely wealthy individuals, they seemingly, I think especially because the Silicon Valley crew are so new, I think they've forgotten the traditional social contract was that you're free to make your millions, you're free to be extremely wealthy, but you need to understand that like there's a level that you can't cross because ultimately society becomes unstable. And Jack Welch and the GE crew and like all these others that just came in and the corporate raiders like obliterated that sense of social contract where you needed to have some kind of like measurable check on wealth.
Right. But the politics is more obvious now as well, though. I think that's what's changed too, is that whereas Elon Musk, you didn't really know which side of the fence he sat, now he's very much hung his hat on the far right. And so it has really connected these oligarchs and their great riches to the MAGA Republican Party. And that is a good thing in a way, because it exposes where their allegiances really lie.
Yeah, absolutely. But, the Democratic Party is not blameless here either.
True. But Nancy Pelosi is retiring, and no politician should be that rich just from being a public servant.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But that is changing too. I actually feel quite positive in this moment, based on what you've said, that through osmosis, things are starting to change. Whereas we're seeing that Mamdani, who lives in a one-bedroom flat and met his partner on Hinge, and he's just like a normal person, is actually gathering an immense amount of support, which is the antidote to the ballroom and to the demolition of the White House and all of the metaphors connected to that movement.
Yeah. Mayor Wu here in Boston has just put together a tremendous coalition. I mean, she basically ran unopposed in the general election because Josh Kraft dropped out because she completely walloped him by like 30 plus points, despite him spending his millions, right? And I think it's really showing that there is this like potential around class solidarity and focusing on economic conditions that you can build a multiracial, multicultural coalition that really focuses on improving people's lives, and much to the detriment of like this oligarch class. And I always look to history around this, and I think a lot of people always wonder why in the 1930s the United States didn't fall to fascism. Not that it wasn't close, right? Like Rachel Maddow has done some really phenomenal podcasts and books on this, like Prequel, talking about the fascist American Nazi Party in the 1930s and the Madison Square Garden rally, and the business plot and all of these things, and how close America came. But I think in some ways, like the way that the crash happened in 1929, the Great Depression, I think America was very lucky that it was Hoover who was in office, who bore the blame. And then they were able to sweep in somebody like FDR, who was a reformer. And I think in the same way, we may see like the kind of sclerosis that has occurred because of neoliberalism crack under Trump, who's accelerating all of it, and usher in a new age or era of politics that is actually the antithesis of that, rather than this kind of consolidation. And that's the more hopeful side that I have. It doesn't mean that things won't get terrible. I mean, the Great Depression was horrific for a lot of people, but the end of that was one of the best eras of prosperity for America that it's ever experienced. And so I think in that way, like the only way out is through. And I think in some ways, like it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, but maybe like the optimistic side is like, maybe that will be the wake up call for us to get to a better politics.
Okay. With that, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you, Alejandra Caraballo. Thanks for joining the Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.